Hey fam, it's your boy William of Occam here, ready to bring you another bomb expose, a juicy one. Today, I will be addressing what I think is a very severe problem we're facing in society today. And so, I'd like to call it Policing the False Allegation Crisis, a Critical Analysis. You'll understand why as we move forward, friends. So, first I'd like to start with some housekeeping.
Housekeeping?
And what exactly are your demands?
We need more lemon pledge.
You need more lemon pledge.
Yes.
We're not responsible for that. You should just bring it from your own home.
No.
First I would like to thank at Let's Hear the Truth and at Toby Cakes for their fantabulous research and support. These two women have been an incredible addition to this little team I'm creating. They've been a huge help for me with this investigation overall and this particular expose specifically. On top of that, I just want to thank you for being here. For joining the venue, for following me, for watching my videos, reading my articles. I would just like to thank you, friends. We're a family, we're a community. We gotta stick together. These liars are on the loose, and they need to be exposed. I think it's important that we continue on with this kind of investigative journalism across the board, which I've noticed has picked up significantly on various social platforms, from Twitter to Facebook to obviously YouTube, amongst a variety of others. So yeah, please check out my friends. Like I said, give them a follow if you haven't already. And let's move along here. Okay, let's go. Let me lay down an outline of what to expect. What you can expect, friends, is that this video is going to provide you with the background to the MeToo movement as a political tool of manipulation through the weaponization of the women as victims' identity. Those women include Amber Heard, Evan Rachel Wood, Chessie Prout, and Chanel Miller, amongst a variety of other women. So let's lay down an outline first. And the reason I'm doing that is to be clear. This is what I'm committed to do because of my academic training. And although I'm highly skeptical about academia as an institution and the corruption of the processes of knowledge production, there are definitely some things that they get right, namely the way to lay out an argument. And of course, that's not the sole province or authority of academia, since Aristotle and his buddies were the ones who really came up with it. So I do owe that pledge of allegiance to academia to a certain degree. But believe me, I'm no academic. I am a skeptic. Needless to say, got some bombs dropping today. And those bombs, in order for them to be dropped appropriately, we need a plane, we need a ship. And the outline I laid out for you, the outline that I will lay out for you, I'd like you to understand that at first I will almost exclusively provide you with the theoretical framework, or the knowledge producers, the professors or whomever that have put together these theoretical concepts that I'll be using to better understand any social psychological phenomena. And then I'll move along from there, and I'll provide you with the data and my particular analysis of it, my interpretation of it, using those theoretical and conceptual tools. So where will we start? We will, of course, start with my theoretical framework. Let's take a look at that. Mr. Antonio Gramsci and Mr. Stuart Hall. Well, these two thinkers are incredibly important to my work and generally, but particularly important to this work. But before we get into them, before I discuss their particular perspectives, I think it might be important for some of you that I perhaps outline why a theoretical framework is so important. By articulating my theoretical assumptions in a clear way, it forces me to address the questions appropriately, and then at the same time provides you, the listener or the reader or the consumer, with a position that you can critique. Without a solid theoretical foundation, you can't really critique somebody. That's why critiques on, say, Twitter or other social media platforms, they sort of fly over everyone's head, because there was nothing to critique there in the first place except an opinion. However, epistemological processes that have built up over time have created certain pillars or foundations from which we can draw, and from which many of us already draw, whether or not we're aware of it. So the importance of a sound theory. Well, a sound theory is able to explain the meaning, nature, and challenges associated with a particular phenomenon. And most importantly, it should be, and in most cases in good work, don't mind my dogs in the background. When I'm communicating to anybody, this is how they behave. They're very excited. Enough. So, a sound theory presented properly, since it's an explicit statement, it not only provides me with the tools that I might need in order to provide an explanation, it also gives you, like I said, gives you, the listener, the consumer, the ability to evaluate not just the data and information critically through that lens, but also allows you to evaluate my perspective on it critically, since I'm being clear about it. And if we're introducing anything to discourse in the ways in which I'm attempting to here, then I think it's very important that whatever we're forwarding also comes within the vehicle of a sound theoretical framework, rather than simply an opinion based off of a set of assumptions that might somehow be connected to a framework, but it hasn't been clearly outlined and applied. So that's where I'm coming from with this section, and you'll understand why as we move forward, and why it's so important to not just my work, but to you, to the consumer, I think, most importantly. So Max wants to be in the video. You want to be in the video? Come here. Max wants to say hi. Look, Max, up here. What's this? What's this here? Okay, enough of that. You go away now. All right, so moving along. My theoretical framework for this analysis takes, I'll go back here for a second, takes these two gentlemen, which I'll explain in a little bit more detail as we move along. Let me begin first. I'll outline Mr. Gramsci. Mr. Gramsci is important to me personally. He's best known for his theory of cultural hegemony, and I'll get into that in a second. He's a founding member and one-time leader of the Communist Party of Italy. He was a vocal critic of Benito Mussolini and fascism at the time, and he was imprisoned in 1926 and remained in prison there until his death in 1937. And in prison, this is where he wrote his most important work, the Prison Notebooks. There's more than 30 notebooks, 3,000 pages of history and analysis. It's considered by critics and great thinkers and intellectuals alike to be a highly original contribution to 20th century political theory. He drew insights not just from Marx, but also from Machiavelli, Spinoza, Pareto, Sorel, amongst a variety of others. He covered a wide range of topics: Italian history and nationalism, the French Revolution, fascism, Taylorism, Fordism, civil society, folklore, religion, high and popular culture. The man covered a lot while he was imprisoned, and frankly, Antonio Gramsci is perhaps one of the most important philosophical thinkers and intellectuals of our time. I say that firmly and assertively with my whole chest. I tell you that. So, what am I taking from Gramsci? What are we using here to analyze the information I'm going to throw at you? Well, his theory of cultural hegemony. The question I ask you, friends, what constructs us? Now, I know many of you will want to lay claim to your identity as this unique thing that you've developed over time, or maybe you're a little more self-aware and have decided, well, my family has shaped my identity, or maybe self-aware even further and you recognize how the community has shaped your identity, or to quote the great Canadian band Sloan that said, "I hate everything that came before me," maybe you're aware that there's a historical context within which your identity formed. We all have different levels of self-awareness, and frankly, Antonio Gramsci was one that was able to provide us with perhaps one of the greatest levels by answering this question of what constructs us. Well, let's begin with the global financiers across the planet. Those global financiers, they're the ones who are able to distribute various forms of identity content. In other words, aspects of our cultural repertoire, those things that we use on a daily basis, as culture is simply a term to refer to those various tools that we use throughout our everyday life to create a lifestyle. And our identity is the anchor or the buoy or marker, landmark by which we navigate these processes. And that identity is provided content by, yes, unfortunately, these global financiers. This sounds very feudalistic at its root because, frankly, we've yet to truly escape a feudalistic age where the barons and baronesses are providing us with the means through which we form who and what we are. It's an unfortunate truth. But if you don't believe me, let's take a look at how and perhaps why they do that. Well, first, let's look at social media. I think this is a frank and naked exposition of how these processes are tightly controlled, how your identity is filled with content that's made available to you by these various social media entrepreneurs that you see here in various formats. And it's great. This is the heart of capitalism, the heart of free market, that you can go ahead and choose whatever platform that you want to consume, what information you want to consume. And yes, there's a great deal of agency in that. However, the list is still limited to those particular enterprises made available to you. Then, of course, we have to address the process of schooling. I would suggest that everybody, there's a particular video about how feminism was actually designed in such a way as to draw women out of the home into the workforce and thus into Soros-funded schools where they could be exploited. It's a quick video, I think, done on TikTok. It's actually very succinct and beautiful. However, everyone, I need you to question the processes by which we are schooled, the processes by which we are educated. I know that the education I was provided in elementary school, the information itself differs a great deal from the information that my two teenage boys have been provided in their schooling experience. And we have to question why those changes came about. Part of it from grassroots activism and parents wanting different curricula, to obviously the capital interests that are involved in the schooling process. Everything from the ways in which schools channel particular kinds of students into particular kinds of post-secondary educations, to the ways in which those post-secondary educations are closely tied to corporate interests. Max, you want to say hi again? Here, Max wants to say hi again, everybody. Hi, Max. Look, he likes being in videos. Hi, Max. You're a good boy. All right. So we move along from the inculcation we experience in the school system to the branding and dissemination of branded products, availability of it. You'll have to pardon me, I've got a bit of a sinus thing going on. So what we are able to consume is limited to what brands will decide to provide for us. And as you can see here, I've laid out pretty neatly how cultural hegemonic processes work. These brands represent the very cultural tools that we use on a daily basis, the pants that we put on, the kind of soap that we use, the kind of tool that we use to consume music or videos, or even print our papers. Then we can get into pharmaceuticals and foods, but it gets even dirtier from there. As you can see, global financiers have a great deal of control over what kind of culture you experience and implement and instrumentalize on a regular basis to create a lifestyle for yourself and your loved ones. We certainly have a level of control over that, definitely. But in the first instance, it begins with the financiers I'm pointing out to here. And by first instance, I mean we're born into a world that we did not create. There are existing entities and agents and actors that are already engaged in cultural warfare. And that cultural warfare is designed to maintain profits amongst a variety of other things, including false narratives, including false allegations, because they're highly profitable. And what happens if you decide that you aren't interested in being a part of this cute little club that's been active for so many years? Well, I think you know the answer to this, friends. There's not many options. The militarization of our police forces across Western and modernized and colonialized nations is shocking. The rates at which police are used to control the public's voice are increasing exponentially. This is important for you to understand, because once you connect these pieces together and realize that these armed security guards are not here to protect you from villains, they're entirely here to protect brands and corporations and what's known in the sociological and social psychological lexicon as private property. So once private property was brought into existence, these particular kinds of security forces were necessary to protect that private property, protect the private property owners from being violated, to protect the brands, and to make sure that you, the consumer, kept on your everyday process of consuming these products and not defying the system. So that's how cultural hegemony pans out. And cultural hegemony is important to understand, especially when it comes to using the kinds of tools that were made available by great thinkers like the other man I have pictured here, Mr. Stuart Hall. And this might be a flashback for some of you to your university days, what have you. I still read his seminal works on a regular basis, whether it's his works on representation or his most important work that he's only credited as co-author. But let's be honest here, friends. Stuart was at the center of this. What he provided us is a set of tools with which to provide a socio-cultural analysis. But first, let me back up here. I'd like to talk about Stuart briefly. Jamaican-born British Marxist sociologist, cultural theorist, and political activist. Alongside some of his colleagues, he was a founding figure of the school of thought that's now known as British Cultural Studies, or the Birmingham School of Cultural Studies. He's sort of an extension of Frankfurt School thinking, those critical theorists that get a lot of really bad press these days because their work was highly misinterpreted and taught to particular individuals that really didn't know what to do with that knowledge except use it for their own gain. His work covers hegemony, cultural studies, from a Gramscian or post-Gramscian stance. He regards language use as operating within a framework of power, which is a significant shift. And that power coming from institutions and political figures in economics. He presents people as producers and consumers of culture at the same time, which is important because hegemony in a Gramscian theory is about the socio-cultural production of consent and coercion. In other words, it's sort of a top-down view, although what Stuart Hall took from it and brought forward, and what I gleaned from it as well, is Gramsci intended on actually providing a sort of a framework with which to understand how grassroots and bottom-up agency or individual level knowledge and culture production can be used to combat hegemonic forces and the coercion and consent processes that we're all subjected to. For Hall, culture was something. It wasn't something, to simply appreciate or study, but, quote, a critical site of social action and intervention where power relations are both established and potentially unsettled. And it was this process of disruption, of disrupting narratives and thus providing a new narrative that makes Mr. Hall so special. And he did this through the process of sociocultural analyses. And what does that mean? Well, he was able to show us how structures, agencies, and cultural practices, as well as political, economic, and media practices, intertwine to influence a historical narrative. And so, if already I'd like to establish culture also includes the historical process. So, understanding that, Hall was able to show how data over 30 years on how UK and US politicians and mass media, how those agents and entities were able to construct and maintain a public illusion of an epidemic of street crimes, particularly muggings. And these muggings, this epidemic, was painted in such a way that it was faulted, or rather, the fault of this epidemic was placed on ethnic minorities, without there actually necessarily being an actual epidemic. So institutions of policing, academic institutions, economic institutions, political institutions, all colluded over the course of 30 years to create this, what Stuart Hall drew from Leonard Cohen, or not Leonard Cohen, Stuart Cohen, something known as a moral panic. The hegemon were capable of putting all of these pieces, these glacial pieces, in place to influence public opinion, to infiltrate the public's imagination with a narrative about an epidemic of street crime in order to generate panic within the population and thus control the population's choices, the population's feedback in a direction that was gainful and profitable to the hegemon in both economic and political terms. One thing about policing the crisis that's important to point out is mugging was never actually a legal term. There had been earlier panics over street crime dating all the way back from 1863. But a new one began in 1972 where a new term was naturalized and given statistical antecedents. A British police officer had just returned from the USA and might have brought the term back with him. Press attention was focused by the courts issuing exemplary sentences in the name of public interest and public safety. Their justification was that there had been a rise in violent crime. Police activity increased as a response, and a number of prominent figures intervened, including the Home Secretary and the Duke of Edinburgh. Public support grew. The campaign soon took on radical undertones, so that mugging became synonymous with street crimes committed by black youths. Does this sound familiar? Does it sound familiar to the synonymity of pledge and donation per se? Or perhaps the synonymity of allegation and guilt that has plagued students and university campuses for decades? What is a moral panic? Like I discussed, a moral panic is a widespread feeling of fear, often an irrational one, that some evil person or thing threatens the values, interests, or well-being of a community or a society. It is the process of arousing social concern over an issue. End quote. Usually perpetuated by moral entrepreneurs and the mass media, and exacerbated by politicians and lawmakers. That is from the Wikipedia page. Why am I bringing all this up? Well, like I told you previously, sound theory helps us understand social psychological phenomena like what we're watching right now with the emergence and endurance of an entrepreneurial industry of false allegations. Major players are gaining profit and political clout by creating victims through false allegations of sexual violence. And every victim requires what? By its very nature, every victim requires a perpetrator. Thus, actors like those I will outline for you here have also created perpetrators out of innocent men. And frankly, I'm sick of this shit. Now that I've outlined the epic thinkers that I'm using for my analysis, I think it's important that we now turn to taking a close look at the players that are involved. And to begin, as you can see, this is a long list, but to begin with these players, I think it's important that I introduce SKD Knickerbocker, or SKDK as it's also known, the public relations company that are responsible and very much the primary player once all things are considered in this operation. And SKD Knickerbocker will come up throughout my analysis. You will see. Of course, this outline of the players involved is not extensive or rather exhaustive. For it to be exhaustive, that would probably require an entire Netflix or Amazon miniseries. But it does. I do provide you with the key players that we want to look at. So let's take a look without any ado. First off, I want to start with an important thinker that sort of started this fire, or lit the fuse, if you will. Andrea Dworkin, an American radical feminist, writer, and activist, best known for her analysis of pornography and her feminist writings that began in 1974. They span 30 years. Most importantly, however, Miss Dworkin here was involved in the collaborative effort to coin an important term. Her writings outline that the lives of modern Western women and girls are an everyday atrocity of male depredations, and that feminism, in her colleague Catherine McKinnon's terms, is built on believing women's accounts of sexual abuse by men. This is where the believe all women, the allegation equals guilt discourse began, was with Andrea Dworkin. In 1983, she addressed the Midwest Men's Conference about rape culture. This is where it was coined, and this is where my use of Stuart Hall and Antonio Gramsci comes in handy. Culture is a term that refers to the sort of everyday tools that we use to live our lives, and she strategically coined the term rape culture in such a way as to infer that the everyday lived experience of men, the tools that they use, the language, the food and clothing that they eat, is primarily directed towards a goal of raping women. And this is the discourse I intend to undermine. And it began with Andrea Dworkin. Moving along from Andrea, we need to take a look at the captains of industry, the captains of the ship that were responsible for steering us in this stormy direction. Anita Dunn. Anita is former strategist for the President Obama's 2008 campaign. She was also the White House Communications Director. I believe I repeat that here. She was the White House Communications Director for President Barack Obama. And in addition to that, alongside that, is something that should be morally dubious at best. Anita also runs the firm known as SKDK Knickerbocker, that we will call SKDK throughout this video, a firm that brings unparalleled strategic communications experience to Fortune 500 companies, political groups and candidates, nonprofits, and labor organizations. Keep all this in mind, folks. I'm outlining this because I think it's important that we include caveats and information prior to the timeline I'll provide you. After Anita Dunn, let's roll on to her husband, Bob Bauer, who is Obama's personal and political attorney. And he was also a former partner at Perkins Coie in D.C., which houses an office for the FBI. He also served as general counsel to the Democratic National Council, or Committee rather, Democratic National Committee. And drawing from Stuart Hall, you can already see how political entities and their discourse have crystallized and congealed. After Bob, we needed to look at Hillary Clinton. As we know, she's a politician, diplomat, and former lawyer, Secretary of State from 2009 to 13. Prior to that, a New York senator. Miss Clinton was, as we know, Billy's husband. Freudian slip. Billy's wife. First Lady, 1993 to 2001. Importantly, as you will find, Ms. Clinton founded the Vital Voices nonprofit in 1997 with Clinton Foundation and Clinton Global Foundation money, which, frighteningly enough, has Jeffrey Epstein's fingerprints all over it. And then we look at another Hillary, Hillary Rosen, a CNN contributor, former chairman and CEO of the Recording Industry Association of America. She's advisor to the Democratic candidates and their development. Miss Rosen is also the head of SKDK until she stepped down in recent months following criticism of Time's Up and the National Women Law Center's support of Andrew Cuomo to discredit his accusers, which I've discussed in other videos, and you will find surprising nonetheless that SKDK, in collusion with the Democratic National Committee, were discrediting survivors that stepped forward in the Andrew Cuomo scandal. And then we have everybody's favorite tenured law professor, Michele Dauber. Michele, as we know, is the Stanford law professor that's been causing a lot of hullabaloo. She was the one that called for Tina Chen to step down from Time's Up after the Andrew Cuomo scandal. She is also the one responsible for drafting an unregulated federal directive, the Dear Colleague letter, in auspicious name of the Title IX policies and legislation, which led to the erosion, if not complete elimination, of due process at Stanford University during sexual allegation disciplinary proceedings. She also ran the Enough is Enough voter movement. I forgot an enough there. There's only one. There should be two. Enough is Enough voter movement that was designed to increase women's visibility and participation in political navigation and voting. That sexual assault allegations suddenly became a talking point for politicians during elections. And Amber Heard was an ambassador that campaigned for the Enough is Enough voter movement. She's also on the board of the Silicon Valley Democratic Committee and has been a major fundraiser for Hillary Clinton and the DNC. And then, very importantly, she was responsible for writing the, quote, Emily Doe, end quote, victim impact statement from the People versus Brock Turner. And it was included in the MeToo manifesto. Sorry for the legibility issues, trying to fit everything in. We move from Dauber, since I'm outlining the players, the timeline will come. We move from Dauber to Catherine Lemon, U.S. Department of Education's head of Office of Civil Rights. That's right, she's on the OCR. She worked for Gavin Newsom, governor of California, between the Obama and Biden administrations. Miss Lehman, who has she's been found to have a key role in the Rolling Stone UVA A Rape on Campus story, which was published and retracted in November of 2014. It's important because SKDK were named in a lawsuit in California for supporting negative media, social media about Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom in the run-up to the 2020 elections. So Lehman has her fingerprints on all of this. Moving from Lehman, we take a look at Jeanne Shaheen, a politician, retired educator, senator of New Hampshire since 2009, and endorsed by Emily's List. Emily's List we will get into. You will learn more about. It's an important facet to this investigation. And we move from there to Ann Kuster. Ann Kuster is a lawyer and politician. She is a rep in New Hampshire since 2013. On top of that, Ann is known to have lobbied against the process of Rohypnol being classified as a Schedule I controlled substance on behalf of the pharmaceutical companies, and also worked on Obama's campaign. And after that, we need to take a look at the ever so active Laura L. Dunn, an activist, attorney, and member advisor to the White House, quote, not alone, end quote, task force, formed in 2014 by Obama. She'd been on NPR in 2010, recounting her own alleged sexual assault at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Ms. Dunn appears in Exhibit 15B of Aramo versus Rolling Stone, as does Catherine Lemon. And in 2014, Laura founded the non-profit organization Serve Justice with S. Daniel Carter. I apologize again for legibility issues. All of these receipts can be found on my website. However, these little player breakdowns, they'll come to light once we move on to the timeline. So we've talked about the players. Now those players, in a very Stuart Hall post-Gramscian sense, were involved in inciting a panic. This panic was a simple process by which these players identified a threat. Andrea Dworkin's work on rape culture and second wave feminism identified that university campuses and males on those campuses were a threat simply by their very nature. The culture itself, the very tools with which we're provided or choose to use to generate quality of life for ourselves, those were intrinsically related to sexual assault. And Andrea Dworkin's work and her friend Catherine McKinnon forwarded this notion of a threat. They identified a threat and then needed to cultivate fear. How was that done? Well, hold campus rallies. The Title IX legislation that has swept college campuses across North America regarding sexual assault. And through that, perform psychological warfare on the public by identifying a dangerous other, in this case, males on college campuses. This fear was cultivated by these actors over time through legislation, through proclamations, through various university and college campus protocols, through the media, through their collusion in how SKD Knickerbocker would perform their political lobbying and support for various political campaigns. All of these things were tied together over time to perform a sort of psychological warfare that hinged upon or anchored on the identification of a dangerous other. And in this case, that dangerous other was a male on college campus. And once all of those processes are thrown into the mixture together, all that's left is the codification of it. And by codifying it through the Dear Colleague process and Title IX legislation, due process can be removed. And that's what we're witnessing now, where allegations are the equivalent to a judge's gavel striking his desktop. It's the process of codification that makes things endure, that makes these processes real, that interpolates the victim and perpetrator into reality, these subjectivities now, in a way that benefits the actors I've mentioned, where if allegations equal guilt, then every woman that cries rape on a campus has the power to identify a perpetrator at will, and that perpetrator, simply by being identified, is guilty. That's the process by which the panic was created. Now, friends, let's turn to the roadmap. All right, well, we've covered my theoretical perspective as well as the processes by which these players have developed a moral panic. This is an outline to inform you of the timeline that we need to look at now. So let's take a look at the roadmap, shall we? We've discussed Stuart Hall and Antonio Gramsci and the importance of these two in understanding how these entities and actors and agents have collaborated, colluded, conspired to generate a culture that understands men as the enemy. And I think we should take a look at the roadmap. See you, Stu. See you, Tony. Let's take a look at the roadmap, shall we? Well, like I said prior, we begin with Andrea Dworkin, who introduces rape culture as a concept in 1983 at a conference. Following that, 1985, Ellen Malcolm starts Emily's List, an American political action committee that aims to help elect Democratic female candidates in favor of abortion rights to office. Emily's List fundamentally changed the landscape of politics. And for good or bad, I agree, women need to be more involved in politics. However, Emily, or Emily Doe, is the term that's used to refer to sexual abuse survivors, or female sexual abuse survivors. 1993, Democratic operatives, including a future Biden consultant, Anita Dunn, co-found Knickerbocker Consulting. It became SKDK, SKD Knickerbocker, but it began as Knickerbocker to eventually become a PR machine for multi-million-dollar enterprises like Time's Up, Black Lives Matter, and, ironically, L'Oreal. And we all know that Amber Heard has been an ambassador for L'Oreal. 1997, First Lady Hillary Clinton and Secretary of State Madeleine Albright begin the Vital Voices Democracy Initiative. that's primarily focused on ensuring that sexual assault survivors, female sexual assault survivors, become a political talking point. 1998, we need to revisit Andrea Dworkin once again. 15 years later, writes the Dear Bill and Hillary letter. She says, with respect to Monica Lewinsky, the whole world is talking about it, but what do American women really think of the presidential affair? And what's their take on the First Lady's performance? Moving on from Andrea in 93, Hillary Clinton and her co-conspirators create the Vital Voices Global Partnership. Now here is where Gramsci's understanding of the hegemony comes in and is very important. The hegemon is now crystallizing. The hegemon are those that decide upon the kind of cultural tools that are made available to you to discuss anything, to dress, to eat, to interact. How you live your daily life is crystallizing in terms of women as victims, as an identity. 2004, SKD Knickerbocker formed through the merger of Squire Knapp Dunn Communications and Knickerbocker Consulting. This was eventually finalized in 2010. 2011, SKDK hired by Cuomo to lead the campaign to lead support for the state's legalization of gay marriage. See, yin, yang, it's not all bad. However, there's always an agenda. In 2011, we also witnessed the drafting of the Dear Colleague letter. The Dear Colleague letter drafted by Michele Dauber, whose picture should appear here, however, I fucked up. The Dear Colleague letter removed due process from Stanford University. It upsets me. Male students were no longer granted due process if there was a sexual aggression or a sexual assault allegation against them. It amended the Title IX legislation. Laura Dunn appeared at the release event with Joe Biden. 2012, SKD Knickerbocker and the Democratic National Committee are in collusion at this point. In fact, this PR firm almost exclusively represents the Democratic National Committee. Hillary Rosen is accused of selling access to the president. Corporate lobbyists are now given open access to the president's discourse as well as the policymakers beneath him. Anita Dunn is a hypocrite. At this time, Hillary Clinton also expands Vital Voices to an international enterprise. It becomes global. Anita Dunn, in 2013, is involved in the Keystone Pipeline controversy. She was fundamentally responsible for ensuring that it became a controversial issue. From its inception, she was a White House insider, repping TransCanada Corporation as PR and the Association of American Railroads. In other words, Anita Dunn played both sides. Credo Action, as it's known, an online network for progressive activists, circulate a petition calling for her, a former campaign advisor to Obama, to stop working on behalf of TransCanada, the company behind the Keystone XL pipeline. It had 116,000 signatures by Tuesday morning, calling for her to drop TransCanada as a client. If Dunn wants to sell her insider access to foreign corporation working for Game Over the Climate and against the principles that helped get her that access in the first place, she needs to understand that she will be held accountable for those choices, end quote, is what the petition states. Anita. We move on to Dauber, where Stanford faculty approve a new disciplinary process with respect to Title IX and the Dear Colleague letter. I don't know what happened to my Dauber picture here. I don't give a shit. We're moving along. If you're a student, a male student attending Stanford, you no longer are given access to proper due process. Allegations are considered guilt. A gavel strike, simply for a woman raising her voice. There's Dauber. Ha! I had it in the wrong order. 2014. Jill Zuckman of SKDK campaigned for the release of Alan Gross, who was a political prisoner in Cuba. And Jill Zuckman was the campaigner on behalf of SKDK and the Democratic National Committee. As you can see, if I were to turn to Gramsci and Stuart Hall again, as you can see, these political operatives, these agents and actors, and the organizations that they are a part of, the UN, the Democratic National Committee, are all on board making these changes that are identifying a dangerous other. And in this case, I don't think that it's a stretch for us to assume that identifying Alan Gross and asking for his release as a prisoner is part of their political narrative. It fits. They also led the War Room for Marriage for Gay Couples. Now, I am all on board the notion that gay couples have the right to marry. I will stand for that. I will die on that hill. However, we all know how PR companies are talented with spin, and it's odd that at the same time she's campaigning for the release of Alan Gross from Cuba, that SKDK is also leading the War Room for Marriage for Gay Couples in a Supreme Court decision. Makes sense to me. Are you grasping how the ideological state apparatus operates? It's very important to note that on April 29th, 2014, the Not Alone White House White Paper is published announcing the White House Task Force that will work with local police departments, officials, and others to combat sexual assault on campus. On the same day, the Department of Justice introduces a new grant for campus sex offenses. Thus, there is now a financial incentive to push this narrative. A few days later, Senator Jeanne Shaheen's re-election campaign committee is registered in New Hampshire, where the 2011 Dear Colleague Title IX was introduced. July 2014, there was a sexual assault summit at Dartmouth College, New Hampshire, introduced by Congresswoman Ann Custer, at which Laura Dunn demands consequences for sexual assault. The next day, the arrest warrant of 18-year-old Owen Labrie, a scholarship student from Vermont, who had just graduated St. Paul's School, New Hampshire, and had been offered a full scholarship to Harvard, is broadcast by the husband of Amanda Grady Sexton, who is on Senator Jean Shaheen's campaign committee and Director of Public Affairs for the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. During this campaign, some of Dauber's more lesser-known support channels, the survivors that she supported, Leah Francis, Emma Sulkowicz, they're widely known to be voices in this campaign that were fundamentally important to ensuring that the voice of the purported sexual abuse survivor was being heard. I have nothing whatsoever against anybody if they claim sexual assault and the trauma that causes. However, in this case, with Leah Francis and Emma Sulkowicz, these were political moves. They weren't organic necessarily. I'm not saying Emma and Leah didn't experience sexual assault. However, their presentation of their experiences seemed to align problematically with the movement designed to ensure that false allegations would be accepted as truth. Leah Francis held rallies, the rallies I spoke about, to drum up fear. The ways in which this moral panic became more than simply an idea. Leah Francis was a victim of alleged sexual assault. She holds a rally supported by, if not promoted by, if not written by, if not authored by, if not created by Michele Dauber, to have her alleged perpetrator expelled from Stanford. Stanford ruled against it. Emma Sulkowicz, famous for her mattress performance, bracket carry that weight, end bracket, from 2014 to 15. It was a work of endurance performance art for her thesis. It was conducted at Columbia University, where she carried a mattress on her back to represent the weight that sexual assault victims carry with them every day. I won't deny this as a sexual assault victim myself. It's a lot of weight to carry. However, the political framing of it, the ways in which these institutions stole the story, took it, co-opted it, appropriated it, and turned it into a political talking point to force down our throats in such a way that, well, it's undeniable. We know how these operations work. We're told how these operations work. And meanwhile, May 30th, 2014, the date of the alleged incident between Owen Labrie and Chessie Prout, which we will get into. It was during 2014 that Laura Dunn started Serve Justice, legal help for sexual abuse complainants. She now runs it for rape survivors. She's one of the experts cited in the Rolling Stone UVA story, and after that, Rolling Stone issued an apology. Dunn defended the original story and denounced doubters, and her legacy was essentially crystallized. 2015, SK Knickerbocker, acquired by Mark Penn's Stagwell Group. Mark Penn is the principal of this group, worth an estimated $75 million. He's the former chief strategy officer and a close advisor to Mr. Ballmer from Microsoft. SKDK also supported Priorities USA, a political lobbying group that joined forces with Emily's List to raise $20 million to engage women voters for Clinton. And meanwhile, at the same time, Anita Dunn resigns as White House communications officer after being called out for her Maoist views that she expressed clearly in a video. Yes, Anita Dunn is a communist fascist. And quite frankly, not very apologetic about it. At the same time, I don't know what happened to my Dauber pictures here. Dauber drafted, oh wait, it's the next slide. At the same time, Dauber drafts Chanel Miller's victim impact speech, otherwise known as the quote-unquote Dear Emily letter. Who's Chanel Miller? She's the victim in the Brock Turner case. Michele Dauber wrote her impact speech, disseminated it to the producers of the film The Hunting Ground, and Brock never heard this speech until his sentencing. At the same time, Dauber starts a new sexual assault class. Stanford offers her sexual assault class ridiculously. Cloherty files a complaint against boyfriend Joe Lonsdale, a Stanford alumnus and co-founder of Palo Alto software company Palantir. He's not only fired back at Cloherty's lawsuit with a counterclaim, but also at the university itself, Stanford, for allegedly bungling its investigation of her complaints. In his claim, Joe Lonsdale said that Stanford neither informed him of any details of Elise Cloherty's allegations that formed the basis of its investigation, nor gave him an opportunity to respond to any evidence against him. It's also during this time that Owen Labrie faces trial in August of 2015, where he's convicted by Judge Aaron Persky of 3 counts of statutory rape and 1 count of endangering the welfare of a child, and 1 felony count of using a computer to lure a minor. He's sentenced to a year in jail and 5 years of probation, and he is required to register as a sex offender. Let's remember Priorities USA, who's joined forces with Emily's List as an SKDK client, has raised $20 million to engage women voters for Clinton. In 2016, I reflect back on Dworkin's letter, Dear Bill and Hillary. Why? Because 2016 was a big year for Hillary. Isn't it funny that Bill's affair with, I forget her name, as we should, amped Hillary's reputation, pushed her into the limelight, and made her a popular figure. Clinton versus Trump in November, following the Brock Turner versus Chanel Miller trial. The Democrats sweep the polls in Santa Clara, California. This is crucial for you to see, my friends. This entire operation has been for these particular purposes. So yes, Dauber spearheading a campaign against Santa Clara County Superior Court Judge Aaron Persky, blasting his decision along with social norms that, she argues, make excuses for young men such as Turner, first-time offenders with long records of achievement. Brock Turner was framed. In 2016 as well, Chessie Prout, who is Owen Labrie's alleged victim, speaks out for the first time with Savannah Guthrie, who also represented the first time Amber Heard spoke out. She also steps forward for Hillary Clinton's Vital Voices, as well as PAVE. June 1st, 2016. 3 very impactful things occur. It is the start of election season. The first event, NBC and Vice Media are given a copy of the Prout family lawsuit against St. Paul's School following Owen Labrie's trial. The second occurrence, Amber Heard appears with bruises on the front cover of People magazine. And the third, the Emily Doe victim impact statement is slipped to the media via the Hunting Ground filmmakers, who have been given the statement by Michele Dauber, a Democratic caucus rep, who boasts that she wrote the statement. Amber Heard also read the victim statement from Emily Doe, aka Chanel Miller, at the Glamour Women of the Year Awards, where she posed for a selfie with Michele Dauber. At the same time, SKDK, remember, PR for the DNC, PR for the Obamas, PR, they released their 162 report that they entitle Women's Leadership and Advocacy Practice. So friends, 2016 was a pretty big year for the false allegations industry. And we find ourselves again in the hands of Anita Dunn and SKDK, SKD Knickerbocker. The Stagwell Group, again Mark Penn's company, acquires the marketing arm of Creative Arts Agency, which is one of the biggest Hollywood agents in the business. They rep Amber Heard among a variety of other individuals. The media and public openly expressed chagrin over Anita Dunn's involvement with the White House. And what do I mean by chagrin? Well, it would seem that Anita Dunn, on top of being related to the, or closely associated with the White House Communications Office, Anita Dunn lobbied for corporations. In other words, sold access to the presidency once again, while also being a key re-election advisor at the time. They considered this over the line. She was helping Obama with his speeches and his debates. One spokesperson said, "We are a public relations, not a lobbying firm. Our job is to help clients with media," though she said it will give lobbyists with whom it works suggested statements or talking points to use on behalf of clients. In other words, the president's talking points were being exchanged and sold to lobbyists and vice versa. And Dunn maintained frequent contact with the White House while her firm was representing a growing list of companies with capital interests in government policy. This is also when the recall election, Dauber's recall election against Judge Aaron Persky had begun. Persky was, again, the judge involved in the Brock Turner case, who Dauber believed did not properly sentence Brock Turner, and thus called for a recall of his position as a judge. Again, first time in 80 years. At the same time, the allegations against Harvey Weinstein arose within this time frame. And this, as you can see, dear friends, the hegemon has been exercising its cultural control over the media, through politicians, through lobbyists, and clearly through Michele Dauber. Evan Rachel Wood also at this around this time, when MeToo was in full force, the Weinstein effect had encompassed the nation. Oddly, ironically, strategically, Evan Rachel Wood has a press release on why she hadn't named her rapist. It's problematic that she says at the time, quote, "I want to do it when I'm ready," and at the same time stands up for the victims of Harvey Weinstein. So as you can see, these cultural forces, these political forces at play, together with the media, collude, create victims, and thereby create perpetrators. This just so happens to be when Catherine McKinnon pipes up. McKinnon had something to say about Hillary Clinton's election that was related to the Me Too movement. McKinnon held a conference where she discussed the Clinton election loss. Quote, "The week after Hillary Clinton failed to shatter that, quote, highest and hardest glass ceiling, end quote, I attended a conference honoring feminist theorist Catherine McKinnon." This is from an article, which you can find, again, receipts on my site or down below in the description. "Who pointedly noted that the American presidential election is one in which, quote, when a woman wins, she doesn't really win because of a system she had no voice in designing," end quote. Again, the radical feminist discourse undercuts all of these events, as you can see, whereby woman as victim, the woman equals victim identity, is central to this discourse. That the entire system is rigged against women. That the entire system is, quote, patriarchal or androcentric, two terms that were invented in the last 100 years to purportedly address oppression that women experience at the hands of men. And it's all been hijacked ever since. Moving along, 2018, SKDK partner Hillary Rosen co-founds Time's Up Fund, who received their financial support from the National Women's Law Center Fund. And the firm also represented Christine Blasey Ford during the Senate confirmation hearings for U.S. Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Some reports indicate that Stanford professor Michele Dauber was involved in the Christine Blasey Ford letter and getting it to Palo Alto Rep. Anna Chu. Michele Dauber is on the committee for Silicon Valley Democratic Party. This is a time when Time's Up was launched. Tina Chen as the president as well. At this time, Dauber's recall also succeeds. Judge Aaron Persky is recalled. First judge to be recalled in 80 years. At the same time, Dauber's recall campaign raises more than $1 million. I hope throughout all of this, my friends, you've been questioning where this money goes, and that you can see how the hegemon instrumentalizes political and cultural apparatus to generate funds, rather steal them from the public. At the same time, a retired Palo Alto judge named Ladoris Cordell was a vocal opponent of the movement to unseat Judge Aaron Persky and accused the recall leader, Michele Dauber, of staging a mailed rape threat containing white powder. There were threats sent to Dauber as well as other supporters, and in those letters was a mysterious white powder. And this staged threat caused 2 rooms at Stanford Law School to be evacuated on February the 14th. This is when Blasey Ford came forward also to reveal that she wrote a Washington Post article, her, quote, confidential letter alleging Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh assaulted her in the early 1980s. This is also a time when Evan Rachel Wood stepped forward again. Here's Christine Blasey Ford during her testimony. And Evan Rachel Wood stepped forward around the same time as well to testify before the United States House Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, Homeland Security, and Investigations in support of the Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights Act. She appeared alongside RISE CEO Amanda Nguyen and RAIN Vice President Rebecca O'Connor in order to promote the full expansion of Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights Act. This is highly problematic on so many fronts because it was at this point that sexual assault was raised from an issue of civil rights to an issue of homeland security. The protests against Kavanaugh arose during this time as well, against Brett Kavanaugh. And guess who was in attendance at those protests, friends? Amber Heard. Around November 6th of 2018, ACLU communications staffer Jerry Johnson pitched an op-ed to Heard and her publicist Gottlieb about what else? How, quote, survivors of gender-based violence, or GBV, were less safe under the Trump administration. Friends, as you can see, these political forces are at play, again, instrumentalizing apparatus, instrumentalizing our cultural systems for political clout and capital profit. It was also during this time Chessie Prout, Owen Labrie's purported victim, released her book, I Have the Right To, and her family began the I Have a Right To campaign and website. It was during this important time that I hope you can see, friends, the ways in which the hegemonic machinations have been delivering to women of the nation a kind of identity content that very forcefully imposes victimhood as a necessary component of womanhood. Nearly inexorably linked is the identity content of being a woman as well as the identity content of being a victim. And we move to 2019. And in 2019, ABC airs a trailer for an interview between Amy Robach and Owen Labrie, who was fresh out of jail for misdemeanor sexual assault. And It's On Us, another women's rights movement, supposedly, who are repped by SKDK, tweet survivors over ratings. Now, when we talk about the cultural hegemon and the way that Antonio Gramsci would want us to understand it, you can see here how the very cultural channels that we have available to us were rampaged by these hegemonic actors. The content that we're able to consume to inform our identity was being monopolized. They tweeted survivors over ratings. In other words, they were trying to quash or block Owen Labrie's voice. Congresswoman Ann Kuster and other representatives called ABC to get the show blocked. Other nonprofits who joined in the campaign include the NHCADSV, a domestic survivors group in New Hampshire, whose director of public affairs was also on Senator Jeanne Shaheen's re-election committee. PAVE, which is the Victims Empowerment Movement, they were labeled 100% lies by Melinda Coleman, Daisy Coleman's mother. If you haven't seen Audrey and Daisy, the documentary, it's a must-watch. Meanwhile, Chanel Miller, who was Brock Turner's alleged victim, is the one behind the Emily Doe letter. It's her victim impact statement, purportedly. However, Michele Dauber had written Chanel Miller's victim impact statement and disseminated it before Brock Turner even got a chance to hear it. She disseminated it prior to his June 2016 sentencing. She disseminated it to filmmakers, the filmmakers of The Hunting Ground, a movie that addresses the purportedly pervasive campus rape culture. These filmmakers received the Emily Doe statement, Chanel Miller's victim impact statement, before the alleged perpetrator even got a chance to hear it. That's right. Michele Dauber also tweets to get ABC to block the show from airing. It was due to air July 18th, 2010. So 2 weeks later, in 2019, in August, a class action lawsuit against Dartmouth was settled for $14 million. SKDK's client, Time's Up, National Women's Law Center, had put up the PR money for the suit. $2.865 million of the settlement appears to have gone to NHCADSV, the New Hampshire Domestic Survivors campaign, and in turn to another nonprofit called Every Voice Matters, which appears on the site of SKDK's other client, It's On Us, which you've heard quite a bit about, and who were lobbyists to block Owen Labrie's ABC interview. So, from a Gramscian perspective, I think you can recognize how our cultural channels have been filled with and monopolized by these actors, these political apparatus constituted by these political actors who are engaging in this discourse aggressively for their own political clout and for profit. It was at this during this same time that Catherine McKinnon, who was close friends with Andrea Dworkin, that I mentioned at the beginning of my analysis here, McKinnon wrote about where the MeToo movement came from and where it's going. And importantly, McKinnon states that if Hillary Clinton had been elected, then MeToo wouldn't have happened. Strange how these kinds of academics use these reverse psychology, discursive acrobatic kind of testaments. That if Hillary had been elected, then MeToo wouldn't have happened. Let's meditate on that for a moment. Because it's almost an admission that MeToo was a forceful political machination designed to make sure that Hillary Clinton had been elected. Further, it was during this year that Evan Rachel Wood testified before the California State Senate to help pass the Phoenix Act, which extended the statute of limitations in domestic violence cases from 3 to 5 years and demanded requirements of the police force to have additional training. And I hope that you can all see that this is a direct assault on the public, whereby these political actors and the machines and vehicles that they have created, the cultural vehicles they've created, are designed to erase due process, particularly for men at this point. This whole campaign began with erasing due process particularly for young men on university campuses. Starting there, that was a genius invention of this radical movement, that they started with a vulnerable population at the time that they had made. They had made the panic. They had created a vulnerable population of young men on a university campus. And that's where they could begin. That's where they could begin their campaign to erase due process. At this time, Owen Labrie had made a second appeal and claimed ineffective assistance of legal counsel at trial, which was unanimously denied in June, and a confidential settlement reached with the victim that I discussed prior. He was released early from a 12-month sentence due to good behavior, and the New Hampshire Supreme Court unanimously denied his appeal for a new trial. I hope you can see how our vulnerable population of young men on college campuses are being utterly exploited by this radical feminist movement hoping to erase due process. Hoping to erase due process, and the actors behind it, they all lead back to our friend Anita Dunn. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at the financial and political machinations here. The firm acquired Sloan & Company from MDC Partners. Sloan & Company operates as an independent unit of SKDK, however. Importantly, again, I need to point out how MDC Partners is closely tied to Cerberus Capital. Cerberus Capital, of course, being an incredibly huge investment location for Harvey Weinstein, his best friend Ryan Kavanaugh, and owned by Steven Feinberg, who was appointed as as sort of an auditor to Trump's intelligence board. Why are these connections important? Well, it's about due process. Thankfully, Betsy DeVos defended due process in court successfully. Thank God. Due process in university disciplinary processes was protected. Thank you, Betsy. And at the same time, around 2020, is when Rose McGowan courageously stepped forward and called this whole garbage out. Fraud alert. At Time's Up, a vile PR stunt, a front for evil CAA, that's Creative Arts Agency, and other human traffickers like Weinstein. Shame on you, shame. And shame on the actresses involved in this. Hashtag SDK Knickerbocker, hashtag Anita Dunn. McGowan stepped forward and called it out. And Alyssa Milano, as we all know, was in the background screaming and shouting and stomping her feet that her MeToo movement that she thinks she started was being squashed by courageous voices like Rose McGowan. Oddly enough, it was also during 2020, Tara Reid steps forward along with 7 other accusers alleging sexual misconduct against Joe Biden. I'm not going to rule this out as a possibility, as I truly believe that Joe and Hunter are complete and utter creeps. I never seen a president who enjoys the smell of a female child's hair as much as Joe Biden. However, the allegations could not be corroborated. This brings us into 2021, friends. Stagwell Marketing Group Holdings and MDC Partners, Inc. successfully complete a business combination known as The Combination following a successful shareholder vote on July 26, 2021, creating a top 10 global marketing services company. Why do I have a picture of our favorite three-headed dog that guards the gates to hell? Well, my friends, MDC Partners was owned by an employee of Cerberus Capital, Seth Gardner. That's correct. Essentially, Cerberus was part of the merger with Stagwell Marketing Group Holdings. That's Mr. Penn, formerly of Microsoft, who now own SKD Knickerbocker, the biggest PR, most important PR machination created that are associated with the Democratic National Committee. They're in the White House, and they're also lobbying corporate entities. It was at the same time that the National Women's Law Center announced it wouldn't be using SKDK any longer as its PR team. Well, at least somebody over there has some ethics. It was during 2021 that Evan Rachel Wood came forward to reveal Brian Warner as her abuser. You can see the attack continues, friends. The assault has continued. But what do? They shuffle around. Roberta Kaplan, Amber's former attorney, resigns. She resigned after the New York Attorney General alleged that she assisted New York Governor Andrew Cuomo as he faced sexual harassment charges in silencing the victims. I'd like to read Evan Rachel Wood's reveal. Quote, "The name of my abuser is Brian Warner, also known to the world as Marilyn Manson," Wood wrote. Quote, "He started grooming me when I was a teenager and horrifically abused me for years. I was brainwashed and manipulated into submission. I am done living in fear of retaliation, slander, or blackmail. I am here to expose this dangerous man and call out the many industries that have enabled him before he ruins any more lives. I stand with the many victims who will no longer be silent." Again, my friends, I would like to quote my good friend at Let's Hear the Truth, one of her favorite comments on situations like this. Projection is everything. Call out the many industries that have enabled him. Only a fountainhead for industries, only a fountainhead for the political and economic hegemonic forces that are hijacking cultural channels could possibly envision this kind of a conspiracy. And frankly, Evan Rachel Wood is a liar of the highest caliber. And that brings me to the end of my analysis currently, brings us into 2022, which I think is very important to note that it was this year that Phoenix Rising was released in March at the Sundance Film Festival. And it's also this year that we've witnessed Stanford lawyer Dauber mocking our beloved Johnny Depp as a drunken, drugged, fake pirate, sharing photos from the Glamour Awards that launched Heard in the hashtag #BelieveHerIndustry, where Michele Dauber wrote, hashtag I stand with Amber Heard and with all survivors, without exception, period, at Leave Heard Alone. That account I would avoid on Twitter with my life. They're liars. Every last one of these fake survivor movement advocates. Why is this important to me, friends? I am a survivor of severe psychological, physical, sexual abuse, institutional gaslighting, and a variety of other forms of harm. And I sit here with you, friends, knowing how these processes work, knowing what a victim looks like, knowing what an abuser looks like, and knowing that we are currently in the midst of a false allegation crisis that we, as a group, need to unpack and unravel. I certainly hope that this video has enlightened you and that you are as committed as I am to unraveling these lies, to unraveling these forcefully generated narratives that are designed to control the way that we speak about things, the way that we interact with one another. They're designed to control our cultural content and the identity content that's made available to us. And if we resist these false allegations, this false allegation narrative, and we police it together, over the years, as you can see, it's been an enormous machination. They've used our culture as a vehicle to bring false narratives into our lives in order to gain political clout and personal profit. And quite frankly, I'm at the end of my rope with it, as I hope you are too, friends. That's the end of my analysis. I wish I had a better conclusion, but I think I've laid it all out on the table for us, and we have a map to work with. We have players to work with. We have a way of understanding how our cultural cultural channels have been hijacked and used to promote a false narrative. And it's time for us to take control of the narrative. This zeitgeist belongs to us now, the real survivors, the truth seekers. The zeitgeist belongs to us, and it's time to take the narrative back. And I hope that this video and expose has contributed to that. And I look forward to hearing more from you on Twitter. So check me out downstairs in the description. I've got all the receipts as well as connections to my website, my Twitter account. Check out these videos over here. They're also informative about this crisis, and I very much look forward to my next foray into this excellent medium. And thanks again to @Let's Hear the Truth and @TobyCakes, true rock stars in research. All right, fam. Your boy William of Ockham here. Stoic as always. Peace.